We've got one last script to make, and it's a bit of a doozy, so let's go ahead and get into it now. We need to go into our resources folder, go to scripts, and create it. We're going to create a new C# script called Game Manager, and hit enter. And you'll notice it actually changes this icon to be this gear icon. That's because a Game Manager is a relatively common script that's going to be in a lot of games that's going to control the game world for you rather than the player, as well as managing some stuff happening in the game. So they gave it a special icon just because it's a very common script to use. We're going to go ahead and double click and open that up. And what we're going to start with is a whole bunch of variables. So what we need to do is add a little bit of space at the top between the opening bracket and our start method here. We're going to say public static game manager instance, and that's going to work just like our static player inventory instance. We're going to say public game object array and set that equal to, or set the name of that to enemy prefabs. It's because we need prefabs to pull or to spawn enemies when we start spawning our waves. We need a public transform array spawn locations. There we go. We need public transform player transform, because we're going to have our game manager keep track of where the player is. We're going to say public text wave text. And once again, we don't have our UI include at the top, which causes us to add the wrong variable there. So we're going to say using Unity engine.ui. There we go. Delete this alignment thing here. Public text wave text. It's going to control our wave. And public game object wave start. It's going to be that wave start text that we just added in the last step. We're also going to say public integer start gold. We're going to set that equal to 100. So we want our player to start with 100 gold. Say public integer current wave is equal to 0 because we're starting without a wave started. We're going to say public float spawn delay is equal to 1f. That's going to be the time between each enemy being spawned. We're going to say public float wave delay is equal to 10f. That's going to be the time between each wave after you kill the number of enemies required. Finally, at the bottom, we're going to say int enemies killed equals 0. Say integer enemies to spawn, and we're going to just set that with a semicolon. Then we're going to say int enemies spawned, and set that equal to 0. And finally, we're going to say player controller PC, because we're going to need a reference to our player controller a little bit later. So now what we want to do is go into our start method, or I'm sorry, before our start method, we're going to give ourselves some space and say private void awake, which if you recall, awake is called before start at the very beginning of the game. We're going to say instance equals this. We're going to say PC equals player transform dot get component, or not get child, get component player controller, open and close parentheses and semicolon, start coroutine, quotation start next wave, and that's a coroutine we're going to write in a later step. And then inside start here, all we're going to say is player inventory dot instance dot add gold start gold. So that's going to give our player a nice amount of gold there when we do that. Let's also go ahead and very quickly go back into the Unity editor, and we're going to select our player and go down to our player inventory and set current gold back to 0, because we don't want to assign gold in that way, because you may have noticed it's not going to update our points UI. Let's also create an empty game object, rename it to game manager, and drop our game manager object into that. And in the next step, we're going to add a little bit more code to get our game manager to have a little more functionality than what it has now.